There's that creepy voice. We are recording. Jen always apologizes. Jen, you don't need to apologize for the creepy voice. My name is Gallie Murray. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the chair of the Oregon Alliance and will be facilitating today's meeting. We will go today from now from 9:30 to 12:30. And I want to give a shout out before we get into the business. Jill, unless the creepy voice is Jen's voice, then yeah, I do expect an apology. That's fair. I want to give a shout out to all the new members in the room. I know that the executive committee recently approved forwarding recommendations for appointment to Oregon Health Authority to become members of the Oregon Alliance. And just want to give a shout out to all of the new members here. For folks who are new members, just a reminder that you'll be getting official letters of appointment sometime probably over the summer. And in September, you will be officially able to vote. So we'll remind you a couple times that you won't be able to officially vote until you have that letter coming from Oregon Health Authority. But if you are a new member, or if this is the first time to one of our Oregon Alliance meetings, give a virtual wave or a thumbs up so we can just see your lovely faces, or if you don't want to have your camera on, that's cool too. But right on. So lots of new folks I'm seeing in here. Super duper big welcome to you all for spending your Friday morning with us to talk about the work of suicide prevention. So welcome on board. Happy to have you here. So a couple big things, or a couple just kind of overviews before we get into the nitty-gritty of today's meeting. So many of you, well, probably all of you know that our legislative session has basically come to a screeching halt as a result of the Republican walkout. And Annette is going to share more about the details of that. But just a reminder that even though that has happened, that there is still a tremendous amount of work happening in the state, and the work continues. And we hope that today's meeting and the information that comes from today's meeting is going to continue to inform and enrich those efforts. So just that we're disappointed, just because we're disappointed in what's happening in the legislative world does not mean that we stop, and this work continues. So thank you for your continued commitment to this work. Also, a little peek preview, spoiler alert, of our September quarterly meeting is going to be in Bend, and it's going to be a hybrid meeting. So it's in September, and there'll be an opportunity for people to be there in person if you would like. And folks who cannot or do not want to travel, or are unable to, there will be hybrid virtual options as well. So it'll be the first time that we will be meeting, or at least an opportunity to meet in person, in a very, very long time. So I'm thrilled to see as many people as feel comfortable traveling and meeting in person in Bend. It would be lovely to see your faces and give people hugs for people who are huggers. I'm a hugger, so it'd be good to see people's faces. Yeah, Jill's asking. Yeah, so Jen, it is September 15th. So mark your calendars as when that will be in Bend. And we would, again, love to see you there in person. And if not, we would love to see you virtually. Over the summer, the Alliance is going to be updating our bylaws, which is always a really fun experience. We're going to be doing that to clarify the terms of service on the executive team. So we currently have some open positions on the executive team for people with lived experience, for individuals who identify as youth, and for an at-large member. So for folks who might think, well, that'd be kind of a cool opportunity to get involved, it is a great way to get involved, and we would love to have you. So please consider either nominating yourself, because self-nominations are absolutely acceptable and we love those. Also consider nominating other folks. And we'll provide more information over the summer about that, but start thinking about lived experience position, at-large position, and our youth positions. And we'll vote on that. Whoever is nominated will vote on those nominations at our fall meeting in Bend. So what's on deck today for our meeting today? So we have a chock full agenda, and we're going to do briefly some small group introductions to get things started and to get to know each other a little bit with a warm up. And then after that, we're going to be hearing from our colleagues at the Oregon Health Authority around the latest data on suicide in Oregon, as well as the annual progress report on the Youth Suicide Intervention and Prevention Plan, the YSIP. We'll have you take a satisfaction survey. Briefly, it's a brief online survey that we'll have you take. And then we're going to end with a couple examples of how zero suicide is being implemented in the state of Oregon. And we'll have some guest presentations around what folks are doing around the state to implement zero suicide. And we're also going to give you a break in the middle of all that. So a bio break, stretch break, whatever. So know that that is coming as well. All right. Before we launch into the rest, we always like to take a moment to remind ourselves of why we do this work and the purpose of why we do this work. So we like to read our vision statement. And I don't know if there's a slide for the vision statement. Oh, Jen is awesome. Anybody want to take a go at reading the Oregon Alliance Prevent Suicide's vision statement, which is up on your screen? I know that the 37 of you in this room are not shy, because I know many of you. So Isaac, thanks so much.
Get the mic in the right spot.
We got you. You're in good company here. Yeah.
Our vision in Oregon, all young people have hope, feel safe, asking for help, can find access to the right help at the right time to prevent suicide, and live in communities that foster healing, connection, and wellness.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Appreciate it very much. All right. And Jen can populate we have a mission statement as well that I think should be populating onto the screen there as well, that we're not going to read, but we do have lots of anchors that guide the work of the Alliance. So we're going to take, in a moment, I'm just going to ask for a motion to approve the March quarterly meeting minutes. And just a reminder that if you are a voting member, your name is going to be up on the slide here momentarily, as far as you are able to vote. Again, if you are not yet an official voting member, your name isn't going to be on this list yet. It will be there in September. So I'll just have folks just take a moment just to look to see, make sure your name is or isn't on there. And then I would love for an ask for a motion to be made to approve the March meeting minutes for the quarterly Oregon Alliance meeting.
So moved, Gordon Clay.
Thank you, Gordon. So there's a motion on the floor to approve the meeting minutes from March. Is there a second?
Julie Schultz seconds.
Julie, thank you so much. So because there are 41 of us in the room, what we will do is use the chat box to indicate, yes, you are in favor, no, you are not. And if you want to abstain, you can abstain as well. And again, this is just for voting members. Please go ahead and—
Discussion?
Oh, sorry, my bad. Gordon, yes, thank you for keeping me on the Robert's Rules train. Yes, is there any discussion about the March meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Gordon. Appreciate it. That's why you all are here, is to make sure that we do this correctly. So thanks for the feedback as always. All right, so in the chat, for voting members, yes, no, or abstain that you would like to move these minutes from March forward.
And Gally, I know you can't see it, but we've got lots and lots of yeses. Don't see any abstains or no's, so should be
Okay.
able to move on.
All right, folks. Okay, those meetings are approved. Those minutes are approved. Thanks, folks. Okay, we're about to go into small breakout groups. And again, this is just a chance, just for a few minutes, for us to get to know each other. And the question, which will be also on a PowerPoint here,
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
oh, our group agreements. Yes, those are really important. So before we go into small groups, these are group agreements that we came up with quite some time ago, and agreements that we feel very strongly about honoring. And so making sure that folks, those of us who have seen these before, are refamiliarizing ourselves with these group agreements. And folks that are just joining us, these are something that we really, again, another thing that we anchor ourselves in, around how to be in space with each other and how to treat each other in this work. So I'll just take a moment to let you just take a peek at those, and then we will go into what will be our breakout groups after this question is posed. So the question, folks, that you'll be asking each other in groups is, if you could choose a celebrity to have a meal with, who would it be and why? And that's on the screen here as well. So Jen is going to make the magic happen and put us all in small breakout groups. We'll just be there for literally a few minutes, and we'll see you back in the big room in a little bit.
I also have an appreciation for Tina Turner, given her recent passing. And
Yeah. Oh yeah, John. She was another one, right? Who like wasn't going to stay in the status quo and was going to push the envelope.
Yeah.
And man, did she pave the way for other female performers and people of color in the music industry.
Yeah, she has a book called Happiness Becomes You, and it's about her spiritual journey in Buddhism and chanting and practices. And I used to think of her as a hardcore, rock person, but she actually was pretty clean for most of her life.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a sad day when she died. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back, welcome back. Hope you got a chance to meet some new folks in your small groups and maybe hear a little bit about celebrities that they were interested in meeting. So, all right. Is Iden Campbell in the room?
Don't think Iden's here, so I will jump in and
Okay, go
do
for it.
this piece. So this summer, for the third time, the Alliance is sponsoring a summer summit that focuses on Black and Indigenous communities. This is led by Iden Campbell and 12-6 Consulting. It's just always a really incredible experience. It's completely centers the voices of Black and Indigenous folks. The featured speakers are from those communities, and also everybody is welcome to come to it, because it's not one of these summits where people just talk at you. There'll be a lot of time for interaction and thinking and kind of engaging with what does this mean for me. And I love the topic this year, which is using cultural protective factors in suicide prevention, and really kind of digging into what does that look like. And so it'll be happening first time it'll be in person. It'll be happening at PSU at the Native American Student Center on July 26th. I think that Jen put registration in the link. It's actually free to come. Hope to see folks there. Go ahead and register if you can make it. There will be a virtual option for people as well, I think, but we're really encouraging people to come in person if you can. Jen, would you mind popping back a slide?
Annette, it looks like Lucas
Yeah,
had their
Lucas.
hand up.
Oh, Lucas, yes.
Yeah, in lieu of Iden not being here, I've been doing a lot of the back end support for this since Iden started it. We're hoping to have I gotta finalize the website actually later today, but we're hoping to have the website live next week. I'll put the summer registration link in the chat box as well. There's a really fantastic lineup this year, and like Annette said, there is a hybrid option. We've had pretty great participation nationally. We even had international folks the first year, but the speakers are really great. We do breakout sessions throughout the day, different like racial caucus spaces, and yeah, it's a really great community event. So we hope to see you at PSU in July.
Thanks, Lucas. All right, I am going to give you the briefest policy update ever. I thought I would start by sharing the fact that I can be so proud Oregon made the New York Times this week, and this was the headline.
Annette,
Yes?
back to the race presentation for a moment.
Yeah.
Could I?
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Gordon.
Okay. In fact, I was writing it last night, making you aware that July is National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So it's an ideal programming time for this event. But if you're doing any pre-articles around that issue, and that's why I'm working on it, because our monthly publication for July, the deadline is June 10th to have a story in there. So if you're thinking about pre-publicity around the issue of minority mental health, get those stories in. But I just want to be sure everybody was aware of what that month signifies.
Thanks, Gordon. All right, I'm going to pop back to talking a little bit about the legislative session. As most of you have probably heard, that there has been a walkout by the Republicans of the legislative session. And it's really actually been specifically around a bill that our alliance supports, which is House Bill 2002. And that bill addresses access to gender affirming care and access to reproductive health care. Here's the current situation. Right now, bills are mostly not being heard at all because there's not a caucus, because there's not enough folks to make a caucus at the session. The best, and this is all everybody kind of guessing behind the scenes, but there was legislation passed earlier in the session to ensure that even if a budget doesn't pass, that funding levels would stay at the same amount that they have been for this biennium to September. It's a little bit of a mystery. If we don't pass a budget before September, it's like we really all fall off a cliff in September. What is super disappointing to, I think, many, many of us is that actually it was a session full of promise. There was a lot of really innovative and interesting stuff, particularly in the behavioral health space, that was moving forward. And there was also important funding decisions around funding our adult plan, et cetera. And all of that is on hold. And we're very concerned because it's at this point, we have not seen, the Ways and Means has not prioritized suicide prevention spending as one of the areas where they're going to be investing. So I want to put out one more ask to folks. I know that we had about 6 or 7 of you that did this, but the more of you that can do it, please email, write, bother your local legislator. If you don't know who that is, Jen can help connect you up with who that person is, or also to folks on Ways and Means to talk about why it's so incredibly important that we invest in lifespan suicide prevention. We do anticipate there'll probably be a special session this summer that will be narrowly focused on talking about budget. And beyond that, I think it's really a mystery to everybody. We're kind of in some new territory.
Annette, I just wanted to jump in and really beg, plead, implore you all to do what Annette is asking you to do. Jen actually created a template that basically says all the things that we need to say around prioritizing suicide prevention funding. Again, the tool that she has, you can literally easily find who your legislator is in your area, and their email is right there, and it literally takes 2 minutes for you to send an email to, Annette did the template too. So Jen and Annette did it, but I'm just asking, and I, like, as a government employee, I can't do it, but I did it as a resident of Portland versus Clackamas County. So please, 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 folks, this is one way that we can continue to advocate, which is the whole, one of the Alliance's responsibilities is to advocate for this work. So this is the way we can do it. It looks like Jill and then Justin.
I just wanted to say that the OHA suicide prevention team put a request over a year ago for $22 million for youth and adult suicide prevention. The governor included 7.7 million of that, so it's about 33% in her recommended budget. And right now, $0 are in any budgets. So they've cut all of the suicide prevention increased funding. So our current funding is not cut, but the increases that we asked for to fully fund the YSIP and to launch the ASIP are not included in any budgets at this very moment.
Thank you, Jillia. Things are pretty dire, folks. We need your help. Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Gally. And I don't quote me on this, Annette, but I think there was a previous bill early in the session that would revert the budget allocations to the previous biennium levels, but that's just that gap between like July 1 and whenever they do pass a budget. So there will likely be people who do not get, full payments for things that starting in July. But the other thing also to add on to the pressure to the legislators is if you know people who are constituents in the senators who have walked out, to reach out to them hand them over the template, give them some talking points about that, and just have them call in or email those legislators. We have one that's in part of Eugene and southeastern Lane County. And so we've reached out to people educators, for example, who are in those areas to ping them as well, because it makes a bigger difference if it's coming from an actual voting constituent.
Thanks, Justin. Sandy.
I so appreciate the opportunity to be in a meeting where you're sharing information about what's happening in the state, and that you are suggesting that people use that information in their own path in life, but not advocating for a direction, as we know that sharing information is appropriate and approved. So I just wanted to add that to the notes in the official recording today. But thank you for sharing all of the information that you just shared.
Thanks, Sandy. I think that's one of the amazing things about this group that you are all now a part of, is that that is the power of this group, that we are, like right now, we're 43 people in this room, and there are many people who cannot be here today. So if every single one of us sent an email, and then people who other people asked to send an email, it is 43 people who previously didn't send an email. So please, folks, your voice actually does make a difference and does matter. Any other kind of questions or comments about how to advocate for suicide prevention funding? Okay.
Okay.
All right. On that note, I'm going to hand it over to Megan Crane and Taylor Chambers, our colleagues from Oregon Health Authority, OHA Public Health, and they're going to talk with us about the Centers for Disease Control data and OHA data, and give us kind of the updates.
Oh, Gal, you want to say something about the chat first?
Oh, yes, folks. So we've had a lot of conversations about how the chat is used in the Alliance meetings, and we've heard from both presenters and from attendees that the chat can be really amazing, but it also can be really distracting to folks. And so what we're going to try, and I'm asking for your help on this, is that if you place questions in the chat, please only place questions in the chat that are pertinent to the conversation that we're having at the time, that we can be directing to speakers. So in that way, we can make sure to give our full attention to the people who have put time and energy into presenting at the Alliance and aren't distracting each other. So go ahead and put questions in the chat that are pertinent to the presentation to be asked of the presenters. And if that doesn't work for us, we'll pivot again, but we're just trying new ways of being respectful to the presenters and to us as attendees, and limiting distraction, because I know I get really distracted by the chat when it's populating a lot too, and I'm sure other people do as well. All right, so on that note, Taylor Chambers, Megan Crane, take it away. It is all yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, Taylor. I'll just go ahead and introduce myself since you're getting started.
Yeah.
So first of all, just to, we are coming from OHA to provide this presentation on data. Some of this data this topic area that we work in is hard, but particularly a presentation like this can be challenging, and there's no reason that you have to sit through it. We'll provide the slides afterwards. A lot of it is reiterating what's in the Youth Suicide Intervention and Prevention Annual Report. We didn't talk about this, but I guess I'm kind of assuming that if folks need support during the presentation, that you can direct chat Annette or Jen. Is that just getting agreement that that's okay?
Yeah, we said that in the orientation, but we didn't say that at the beginning of this meeting. So yes, absolutely, Megan.
Great. So again, I just really want to reiterate, like we want to, as requested, provide data, but it may be challenging for some people to sit through a data presentation, and you don't need to, and we won't be offended. I think we have about a half an hour for this presentation, just as an FYI. So Taylor's going to get started on the presentation, but I'll just introduce myself. Megan Crane. I'm part of the Oregon Health Authority Suicide Prevention Team. I work on some of our healthcare focused initiatives, and I will pass it on to Taylor.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Megan. So my name is Taylor Chambers. I use the she, her series of pronouns and serve as a public health suicide prevention coordinator on OHA Suicide Prevention Team. And as Megan said, I'm going to get us started today. So good morning, everyone. Today, Megan and I have been asked to present on the most recent suicide data available through the Oregon Health Authority Public Health Division Injury and Violence Prevention Program. This presentation includes emergency department and urgent care center suicide-related visits and suicide death data, some of which comes directly from the 2022 WISIP annual report that was recently released. We'll present on finalized 2021 death data and ED-UCC or urgent ED and urgent care visits through 2022. This is only one aspect of the picture in suicide. This data does not highlight other data sources such as the Student Health Survey, qualitative and focus group data, Big River programming data, and the amazing work being done around the state by each of you in terms of training programs, awareness activities, and suicide prevention work. As Megan already said, some of this data may be challenging to hear. Slides will be made available to you in the follow-up material, so you can refer to them and follow up on the data resources provided at the end of the presentation. Next slide.
Yeah. Taylor, I'm just going to jump in. You were breaking up just a little bit. So while I think we would all love to see you on camera, maybe it would be better to go off camera just to make sure it's clear.
Okay, I'll turn my camera off and we'll keep going. And if it gets worse, just let me know, interrupt again. So today we'll be focusing on what the data is telling us. We don't have time today to dive into the limitations of the data and data systems, but we have covered that in presentations in the last year, which are linked to this PowerPoint, which again will be made available after the fact. It's important to note that data systems, like our institutions, have been developed within systems of oppression and racism, and we recommend reviewing the presentations linked here to learn more about the data systems and existing limitations. The Injury and Violence Prevention Program has also developed a data glossary, which we've linked to help you navigate the data sources that we maintain. Throughout the presentation and while reviewing data and data trends, you may hear the term small numbers when referring to data. And I do want to note that we will use that term throughout this presentation. Small numbers are associated with estimates of lower statistical credibility and an elevated risk of a privacy breach. Estimates with few cases tend to be unstable and prone to misinterpretation. For example, it can be hard to answer questions around if certain Oregon youth suicide rates by race and ethnicity are increasing due to the low number of deaths per year. This is where we need to rely on state and national trends, and regardless of the counts, ensure these populations are considered in suicide prevention, intervention, and post-vention activities. However, I want to emphasize that any loss to suicide is too many. Any individual that dies by suicide deserves the dignity to be included, to show value to their life, and to be considered in informing prevention efforts. Yet we will still use the term small numbers from a statistical standpoint. Next slide. So this is a summary of suicide-related visits to emergency departments and urgent care centers, or EDs and UCCs, as you may hear me say, for all Oregonians under 18 years old. We are breaking down the youth data between those under 18 and those 18 to 24 throughout this presentation to provide context around youth suicide. This figure comes directly from the WISIP annual report. So if you want to look at this and understand it in greater detail, you're welcome to go to that WISIP annual report again. To note as well, we sent out a monthly suicide report where this data lives throughout the year. That happens on a quarterly basis. We release that monthly suicide report, and anybody is welcome to sign up for that. Traditionally, this type of data set was used to track disease outbreaks or syndromic outbreaks in essence. Now we are looking at suicide-related visits to EDs and UCCs to identify spikes. This chart is displaying suicide-related visits from 2019 to 2022. As you see, each year has the different color. Suicide-related visits to EDs and UCCs for youth aged 18 and under in 2022 are similar to the rates they were in 2019, with a bit of a greater uptick in February through April of 2022. We did not see a significant spike in suicide-related visits to EDs or urgent care centers in the last 3 years. Next slide, please. The number of suicide-related visits to emergency departments and urgent care centers for youth aged 18 to 24 is represented here from 2019 to 2022. And what we see is that data from 2022 is similar to the last 3 years as well. So we're not seeing significant increases in this data during COVID. All right, next slide. Across ages, Oregon is one of 7 states that had a statistically significant decreased suicide rate in 2020 compared to 2019. However, we saw that rate go up again in Oregon as well as nationally in 2021. So we saw the drop and then it went up just a little bit again in 2021. In 2021, the rate of suicide across all ages in Oregon was 19.5 per 100,000, whereas the US rate was 14.1 per 100,000. Next slide. This is another table that comes directly from the YSIP annual report. These are finalized summary statistics for youth suicide in Oregon. In 2021, the rate of suicide for youth ages 10 to 24 decreased for the 3rd year in a row. Oregon tracks suicides for ages 9 and under. However, some states do not track this or define these deaths as suicides. Therefore, to be comparable at the national level and for state ranking purposes, we separate out deaths for ages 9 and under. Since 2018, Oregon's youth suicide rate has decreased for those aged 10 to 24. While we are encouraged by this, we will need to see trend data years to determine if this decrease will continue. Next slide. Here's a graphical representation of the youth suicide trend in Oregon versus the United States for those aged 10 to 17 years old. As you can see, 10 to 17-year-olds hovered around the national rate until 2011, and then we saw a spike. In 2019, the rate dropped below the national rate for this first time since 2010. We saw an increase between 2019 and 2020, with an increase of nearly 25% among youth 17 and under. While any suicide death is too many, keep in mind that from a data analysis standpoint, we are dealing with small numbers, which can cause significant percent changes, even with small changes in numbers. However, from 2018 to 2021, we saw a 3-year average decrease in suicides. And again, in 2021, we dropped below the national average with a rate at 3.9 per 100,000 in Oregon, compared to 5.1 per 100,000 for the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, here is a graphical representation of the youth suicide trend in Oregon versus the United States for those ages 18 to 24 years old. The youth suicide rate in Oregon in 2021 was 22.1 per 100,000 compared to 17.8 per 100,000 for the United States. We have seen increases in the 18 to 24 age group since 2012. Unlike the 10 to 17 age group, we did not see a decline in 2019, as we observed on the previous slide for age 17 and younger. However, we did see a decrease in 2020, unlike 10 to 17-year-olds. 2021 data remains similar to 2020. We don't have a clear idea as to why we are seeing these differences between 10 to 17-year-olds versus 18 to 24-year-olds, although some theories. But it's important to note for prevention efforts what we're seeing and what the trends look like. Next slide, please. Here's a chart of age-specific rate of suicide by sex in Oregon from 2018 to 2021. Suicide across the lifespan for all sexes is seen here in blue. For men, seen here in orange, suicide rates generally increase with age, while women, seen in green, see an increase through the middle years and then decreased rates later in life. And I'll turn it over to Megan with the next slide.
So again, this chart is coming directly from the YSIP annual report, looking at characteristics of youth suicide in Oregon in 2021. I'm going to focus some on, in some later slides, on race and ethnicity and mechanism of death, so I won't focus too much on that here, but again, want to emphasize on this slide regarding youth suicide age 24 and younger, those aged 20 to 24 made up 63% of the total of suicide deaths. And there's significantly more boys and young men dying by suicide than women, girls or young women, which is also the case across the lifespan. Here you can see that males account for 78% of all suicide deaths. Next slide. So we're going to go a little bit into some race and ethnicity data, and I just wanted to frame that a little bit for folks. So the convergence of identity, politics, and inequality provides a unique opportunity to further explore the complexities of race and ethnicity and to improve the way we collect and use data as a tool for social justice. We recognize and acknowledge that the Oregon Violent Death Reporting System, which is some of the data we'll be looking at today, does not capture the complexity, culture, richness, and diversity of Oregonians. And data on race and ethnicity are used to identify health disparities and measure progress towards achieving equity. Historically, the focus has been on people categorizing themselves according to prescribed groups instead of how people self-identify based on their own lived experience. For instance, the federal government defines race and ethnicity as two distinct separate entities, although many may view them as interchangeable and may not distinguish between the two concepts. People who are multi-ethnic or multiracial are expected to choose, or their family and friends for someone who has died by suicide is expected to choose. Only the one best that represents who they are, when they may not resonate with them, and they may not, these categories may not accurately reflect how they feel. In population-based surveys, certain racial and ethnic groups are often aggregated or grouped together to allow for more robust numbers of analysis. However, broad racial and ethnic groupings often mask important differences between more granular ethnic groups and do not acknowledge important differences in culture, custom, healthcare beliefs, and practices. Oppression has led to social expectations around masculinity that can create stigma, which makes asking for help perceived as weak, isolated, or increase other risk factors influencing men. Which, sorry, that was we're getting into some race, ethnicity, and sex here. So, so thank you for allowing me to do that framing. I know some of you have heard that before, but really want to set the stage, recognizing we have a wide group of folks on the call today. So if we go to the next slide. We're looking at the number of suicides among youth aged 24 and younger by year and race ethnicity between 2018 and 2021. And we really, this is a slide we haven't put in this presentation before, but felt it was important because you can see the greatest number of deaths are happening in non-Hispanic white individuals, youth, followed by Hispanic individuals and youth. What may be harder to see when you're looking at the chart is that non-Hispanic white youth have trended down in deaths. So if you look at the, let's see, halfway down, the largest number there, non-Hispanic white, you can see that that has gone down between 2018 and 2021. In 2018, non-Hispanic white youth accounted for almost 75% of all deaths, whereas in 2021, they accounted for 64% of suicide deaths. So while we see non-Hispanic white suicides trending down, what you'll also see, recognizing that we are dealing with some small numbers here, is that we don't see that trend in other race and ethnicity categories. So I think that's something we really wanted to highlight, to recognize that we do want to celebrate the achievement of seeing our reduction in youth suicide rates over the past 3 years. However, that seems to be mostly driven by a decrease in non-Hispanic white youth suicide deaths. Next slide. So I'm going to jump a little bit into looking at sex here. You can see on this slide suicide rates among youth ages 10 to 17 and ages 18 to 24 by sex. For a little bit of context here, you can see on the slide, but within this data system that we're talking about, when we talk about sex, we still really are talking about binary. There are abilities to identify transgender individuals, and this data, that data point was added to the data system in 2013. However, transgender suicide deaths are not separated out in these visualizations due to small numbers, which is definitely a limitation of this set. Between 2016 and 2020, 14 suicides were identified among transgender youth, and they may be included in male or female categories as well as being identified as transgender. So we are not able to evaluate transgender suicide rates for youth in Oregon due to small numbers. However, national evidence tells us that transgender women, men, girls, boys, and non-binary or non-gender conforming people are more likely than cisgender people to attempt and die by suicide. And this is not because of how they identify, rather due to issues such as transphobia, acceptance from their families, trauma of experiencing rejection, and not having access to the healthcare that supports their ability to live their authentic lives through gender-affirming healthcare. So you can see here that when we look at suicide deaths, we do see higher rates of suicide among boys and young men. You can't compare, although we put them on the slide to kind of keep down the number of slides, you can't compare the age group of 10 to 17 and the age group of 18 to 24, but you can compare within each of those age groups between male and female. Just noting again, we are not talking about suicide health or the student health survey data in this presentation, but that can provide some insight to us when we're looking at gender identity and sexual orientation. Next slide. So this is also some new data, a new data source that we're putting in. The Oregon Association of Hospital and Health Systems is reporting from all Oregon hospitals, excluding VA and some federal regulated system. We've shared some of this data, but it's still a new data system that we're exploring. But we thought it was important to put this slide up when we're talking about race and ethnicity as well as sex. The bars represent rates. So blue for boys and young men and orange for girls and young women. You can also see the number of visits labeled at the top of each bar. So you can see a disproportionate impact on girls and young women compared to boys and young men, which is the opposite trend we see for death data. Again, this data has some limitations in terms of binary sex, but it is recognizing those limitations. It is a new data set that I think really shows us insight into suicide attempts and ideation, admissions to emergency departments, to tell that broader picture of what the impact of suicide is looking like in our communities. You can also see a disproportionate number of visits from Black or African American girls and young women. Next slide. This is the same slide as before, just showing for ethnicity and sex. So again, just providing some insight into what this data set can do and the information it can provide. Next slide. We're going to get a little bit into means a little bit, looking at both the death data and ED visits. So here we're looking at death data for 10 to 17-year-olds, separated out by male and female. And as a reminder, males in this category made up 78% of deaths. So we see a higher percentage of youth dying by suffocation hanging, as opposed to what we'll see on the next slide, 18 to 24-year-olds, where the leading mechanism of suicide is firearm. And the rate of firearm suicides increases from about 37% to just over 50% for comparing 10 to 17 and 18 to 24-year-olds. Next slide. So again, this is just breaking out by 18 to 24-year-olds, recognizing that there are distinct prevention, that this data can inform prevention efforts in the way that we approach this data. Next slide. So what you can see here is we're back to the Oregon Association of Hospital and Health System data. So again, as opposed to looking at deaths like we looked at the last slides, we're looking at suicide attempt and self-harm for those that were admitted to the emergency department. So there's not as much variation, and it may be obvious, but just to state that we don't see firearm representing a high percentage here due to the lethality of that method. So we are seeing poisoning and then followed by sharp object as the reason for those with a suicide attempt or self-harm admitted to the emergency department. And this is for under ages 17 and under. And then the next slide is for 18 to 24. And there's actually not, so next slide. There's actually not a huge amount of variation between 17 and under and 18 to 24 in this category, but again, provide some insight into means when we're looking at deaths versus ED admissions when a death does not occur.
Megan, just a question.
Yes.
Firearms aren't on either one of these charts, right?
Correct. They're included in the other, but there were like 7 firearm events in all this data.
So the last 2 charts are then firearm.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but yes, this chart and the last one I showed are for emergency department admission data when there was not a death, as opposed to the earlier slides I show, which were means related looking at suicide deaths. Does that answer your question?
I think so, thanks.
Okay. Next slide. We wanted to provide a little bit of insight into what we're seeing in 2022 data, which again is preliminary, but what we're seeing is that preliminary data in Oregon indicates that there will be an increase in the number of suicides for youth under 18 years of age, with numbers similar to 2020 data. So again, we've seen that 3-year trend. It looks like we will see some increases, but to levels we have seen previously. For those 18 to 24 years of age, it looks like it will remain similar to previous years. And just as a reminder, we continue to see variations in Oregon rates by county, with some counties seeing increase in suicide and some staying stable or decreasing. Preliminary data indicates a decrease in the number of suicides in 2022 compared to 2021 across the lifespan. So good news there. And we really want to be looking at data trends over multiple years to provide the most value in understanding what suicide looks like in our state. And I just want to reiterate that while we still can celebrate the hard work that has contributed to a 3-year decreasing trend among youth suicides, while remaining focused on working to prevent and reduce risk factors and increase protective factors for youth and their families and caregivers. And again, as a reminder, this is only related to our kind of high level, state level data systems, data related to evaluation and impact of programs and training, and qualitative lived experience narratives from communities play an integral role in our understanding of suicide and prevention strategies, although are not included in this presentation. Next slide. So again, this is really just reiterating what Taylor said at the beginning. We want to try to make sure that we're presenting timely and new data as that's available to us, recognizing that there is a lot of background and support we've tried to provide about understanding what data systems we're talking about, their limitations and what they can do. And again, we would point you to the recorded presentation, really about, this presentation was about what the data is telling us. This presentation linked here is about, how the data tells us that and what the limitations of that are, as well as the data glossary. Also wanted to note that there's a children's system of care data dashboard that includes data for young people involved in child serving systems and combines data with child welfare, the Office of Developmental Disability Services, OHA, and juvenile justice, which is another data source. We continue to try to get better at our data sources, and provide support to the Alliance and advocates, folks at the county level, community-based organizations, recognizing that we have a lot more work to do to meet the needs of our partners. Next slide. Again, you'll have time to review this, but I just wanted to note that the Student Health Survey 2022 results have just been released. There is a data dashboard for the Student Health Survey now. It doesn't have the 2022 data populated yet, but the state level report, including mental health and suicide data, along with many other factors that we know affect young people's risk of suicide, is included there. Also, as we talked about in this presentation, we have limitations in our data related to REAL-D, which is race, ethnicity, language, or disability, as well as SOGI data, sexual orientation and gender identity data. There was, and I apologize, that should say the 2021 Data Equity Act. There's a lot of work going on to improve our data systems. And then also, if you're interested, this was primarily focused on youth suicide, given the audience, but the Adult Suicide Intervention and Prevention Plan has been published and includes a wealth of data related to adult populations, and we will be doing a data update to that report. So some links there for you to think about. There are also, when you get this, we included some appendix, some additional slides we didn't have time to get to, but that we thought would be of interest. Next slide. So this is the last slide. Just shake it off a little bit. That's a lot. This is not my favorite presentation to give every year, but I recognize the importance and value and want to meet the needs of the Alliance. So, Taylor and I have done our best to do that in a succinct way. I always try to acknowledge that this is a data presentation on really high level data. And again, as we've said throughout the presentation, it does not include information on, all the good work that is happening at the local and state level, the Big River programming data, the amazing work being done around the state by each of you in terms of training programs, awareness activities, and suicide prevention work. And that this work is heavy and hard, and looking just at data misses so many of the hopeful moments that we create and witness. So it does require persistence, and looking at the data can be challenging to live in, day out, and day in and day out. So I just leave you with this slide. The Why We Build project out of Lane County, which is the storytelling project around telling stories of suicide attempt survivors, says that that project is about telling suicide from a different perspective. It's a story about life. And I think that's so important for us to remain connected to. And I don't think it's something I have to tell people on this call. But, I put these pictures up here with the questions of kind of what is the hope that keeps you able to do this work? And what connections do you have to support you and fill you up? And so these are some examples of mine. In the center, just one picture of amazing colleagues, of so many of you, but a couple, Jill, Gally, and Annette here presenting on the amazing work of Oregon that all of you have contributed to at the American Association of Suicidology Conference, where many other Oregon folks were featured as well. You have my dog, Rasso, who gives me lots of life and makes me happy. Note that I put a picture of my dog and not a picture of my wife on this slide, but I'll let you interpret that. Creativity, so the bottom left here is just a little Easter egg that I made. I don't celebrate Easter, but I love the tradition of Easter eggs, and I love doing that. Tomatoes from our garden, which I say our garden, it's my wife's garden, but I enjoy everything that comes out of it. So really looking forward to those fresh tomatoes later this year. And then my two nieces, and just really trying to think about them and the future that we want to leave with them related to mental health and suicide prevention, but just the world that we want to. So hopefully that makes sense. And if there are things that give you hope or fill you up, feel free to put them in the chat to help all of us, to fill us all up after this presentation. And please, we're open to any questions, recognizing I think we went a little over time, so apologies for that.
Megan and Taylor, first of all, the amount of energy and time it must have taken for you to put this together was significant. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone in the room. I know we all appreciate how much time and energy it took for you to do that. So thank you so very much. we do have time for a few questions. That was a lot of information that Taylor and Megan offered. But do folks have any questions around what was shared?
Justin,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Justin.
Hey there, thank you. Probably, I mean, thank you so much for all the info. I took some screenshots. Is that slide gonna be available?
Yeah, yeah, and most importantly,
Awesome.
you have the picture of my dog, so you can share that. That's the
Yeah,
most
absolutely.
But yes,
I do the same thing with my dog. I'm with you 100%.
we
The
will be sharing the presentation. Yes.
Perfect. The other piece was, I'm wondering if in the process of, putting this together for 2022, that you had a chance to look at other states in the area, if there were similar declines. I know that's obviously a tough sort of bit of information to get to when we're already just trying to struggle with the information we're getting. But I'm curious if the trends are similar in our region, countrywide. I mean, they're not, in many respects, these are not surprising pieces of information in terms of the trends and the rates and
Yeah.
methods and so on.
Yeah, our 3-year decline in youth suicide is unique, and something to celebrate. And again, we go into 2022 anticipating some increases for ages 17 and under, which is discouraging, but recognizing that we're going to see the trends are going to go up and down, and we're still doing great work. So I don't think 2022 data is so preliminary still around the country that I think it's hard to get an idea of what that's going to look like. But I do think our 3-year decrease is unique. Jill, I'll just make sure you didn't. Did you want to add anything else there?
The CDC in a meeting with them said we're one of 3 states that have seen that decrease. So that feels pertinent to this conversation. The other thing, since I'm off mute, I just like when I look at the data and the numbers, and knowing that that 2022 and so statistical analysis, part of a decreasing trend can have some bumps. And so that feels important to also just to level set around. And it to me, from my lens, that it's a call to action, that we like some of the successes around schools paying attention to their Addis Act plans and getting trained and that type of thing, I think mattered in Oregon. And the newness of the Big River mattered in Oregon. There was energy around that. And so I think it's just like there's a shelf life for suicide prevention training. You can't just take it once and then forever be well equipped to recognize suicide risk. And so it's like, I think collectively as a team here, we as the Alliance need to think about how we can speak that into action, that there's a call to action to re-up on all of those things without creating panic. And so like that's the dance to dance. And then also just very, very clear mandate that we have a lot of work to do for Black and African American, Latinx, American Indian, Alaska Native folks in our state. And we have to get serious about that. Like that has to be the center. And so I just like, in my mind, those two things are the loudness of that report to me.
I just want to add, Justin, to your original first screenshot commentary as well. The slides also include an appendix with more data we weren't able to present today. So we do have, there's some more, and if anybody has any questions, Megan and I are happy to field those. If you're reviewing that later, we can always talk to our data analysts too. And I'm sorry, Annette, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I'm always really surprised. Thank you. It was a great presentation. And I'm surprised by the numbers around the emergency room admitting, because everybody I talk to in the healthcare world is just saying it's the worst we've ever seen. It's the most terrible situation ever. And I'm confused about that. And I don't know if you all have any sense of what the disconnect is there. Is it that they're seeing fewer people, but it's higher acuity, or?
Annette, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, Phil, go ahead. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, the data is through 2021, and that's still the pandemic. And I think so many families were afraid of getting COVID, going to the emergency room, that they were reluctant to go to the emergency room. I think the data for 2023 is going to be very different.
Yeah, and I would just add that we have talked about, so through the Oregon Association of Hospital and Health Systems data and syndromic surveillance, right? Those are looking at very specific suicide attempt and self-harm related to suicide. That there are other metrics or indicators around mental health, broader mental health, that I think I would suspect might show some of those increases that anecdotally we're hearing. So again, those are some quarries and areas we're certainly trying to do some better work around to understand that, but just wanted to provide that context that the data we showed today is a pretty narrow viewpoint when we're talking about mental health and behavioral health. Yeah, so hopefully that helps provide some context. Jill?
I just wanted to name two other things that the concise answer is people don't know. Like, that's a question that we, in our monthly data review meetings internally at OHA, we ask that question almost all the time, almost every time, because there is a disconnect between what we're hearing and what the data charts are describing. And so I just want to name that there's lots of maybe it's this, maybe it's acuity, maybe it's geographic, maybe folks we're hearing from OHSU in particular that they're getting emergency department visits for psychiatric needs from really far away, and that's a difference in and so maybe it's because there's not access to care, and so there's lots of it's a rich area to ask questions about and to learn more about.
Mary?
Yeah, this will be our last question, folks, before we're going to need to move on after Mary.
Okay, sorry about that. I know at least Washington County Schools, we're really trying to direct students and families to like Hawthorne Walk-In Center or, other areas, if possible, of course, only because a lot of the hospitals, it just can be really traumatizing for kids to go there if they're not at the right hospital and there's not supports there.
Good point, Mary.
Thanks
Also,
for adding that.
yeah. All right, folks. So again, huge thank you to Taylor and Megan for that presentation. Really appreciated. So keeping on the theme of data and information, I'm going to hand it over to Jill Baker, who's going to talk with us about the annual Youth Suicide and Intervention Prevention Plan report. Jill, it's all yours.
All right, we'll see if I can share my screen. Well, that seems promising already. That's excellent. Can somebody tell me how much time I have? I know I could be an adult and look at an agenda, but it would be.
We should be done about 11:05. We're about 10 minutes behind, so you can take a little longer. So 11:10. Let's do 11:10, including questions.
Yep.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jill Baker. I work in Health Systems Division alongside Shanda Hostetler. We monitor, implement, and update the Youth Suicide Prevention Intervention Plan. So just as a reminder, Oregon has a framework for suicide prevention that both the adult and the youth plan nestle themselves in. There are strategies in green for all Oregonians that we're hoping to have just wide reach and depth on, that we have some specific strategies for selected sectors and spaces in the yellow, and then in the orange, after suicide risk is present and indicated, strategies around treatment and support and services. And that is also the section of the framework where our postvention response strategies are that live there. And so just naming that, if you're like, I haven't seen this graphic, I don't know what it is, that in the presentation, there is a 10-minute video that is not going to win any sort of Academy Awards. It's just a Zoom recording of me explaining the framework, but can be helpful in understanding when we're talking about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 strategies. And so my hope today is to remind you that we are working in our list of 2023 priority initiatives that you all and OHA and our state agencies that serve youth collectively decided were the next best step, the most important things to work on in 2023. And that we do that annually. So in the fall, in September, we'll start thinking about what do we want to start, stop, and continue for 2024. The intention is not to reinvent the wheel every single year, but to chiropractically adjust what we're doing to be responsive to the time in which we find ourselves. So today I want to just give an overview of a reminder of what we're working on for 2023, big, broad buckets. And then I pulled a few from each of those 3 sections of the framework, the green, the yellow, and the orange, to give you some updates on, because as we're slugging through life, it sometimes can be hard to keep track of all of the things, because as it turns out, in 2023, we picked 150, now 7 initiatives to work on. One of the things that we added midstream, so normally we'll do a total adjustment in the fall, but very recently, a couple of weeks ago, Oregon received an invitation from SAMHSA to participate in the 2023 Black Youth Suicide Prevention Policy Academy. So we added, and I don't know why it says May 2023. It's in the Academy's in July, so that is a typo. I apologize. The invite came in May, maybe that's why. And so that initiative is now on the live smart sheet for all 157 initiatives. And if you're like, wait a minute, what is that? How can I get involved? Just know that we're at the very start of that piece of work, that we've invited some of you to participate in helping us map out how to do that in a good way. The intention is that we'll move slowly and with intention, and ask the question about who to be in the room, and how we can build an action plan to address Black youth suicide prevention in our state. It's very exciting. So that is just the outline of where the spread of work is, if you're wondering. So 23 of them you all picked and are working on in your committee meetings. When you go to alliance meetings, the initiatives that you picked are the work that you are literally moving forward in 2023. 123 are OHAs or OHA contractors, or other OHA folks that are not just the suicide prevention team. 8 are ODEs, 5 are ODHSs, and then 3 are in this other category. Shanda, would you put in the chat the link to the actual, the smart sheet, the 2023 initiatives? So if you want to see the whole list, it's there. So I'm going to start in tier 1, the upstream prevention activities. So all of these things that are listed on this very wordy slide are things that we picked for priority initiatives in 2023. I want to just call out that 3 of those, well, 4 of those are Alliance related. It was interesting to me that a lot of the work that the Alliance chose was farther upstream in looking at equity pieces in particular. And so I wanted to include those as an affirmation of those decisions that you all made together and the work that you're doing. And to thank you for that, that work. You may not know that that one of the things that our Question, Persuade, Refer, which is one of our Big River suicide prevention trainings, one of the initiatives that they're working on is QPR for teens, so that teens can take a training program similar to the adults in their lives. And they've done just an incredible amount of good work in piloting it and asking for youth feedback, gathering youth voice, making adaptations based on what the young folks have said. And so expect to see and be curious about that in the coming months. There we go.
While you're looking at that, if I can just interrupt to say, if anyone wants to join either the BIPOC or the white, we call it our WALK group, the White Accountability and Learning Collaborative, please, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and please just send me an email and we'll get you invited to those. They're monthly meetings.
Thanks, Annette. I had success and then it moved back. Why? There we go. Here are some things I wanted to just to amplify and call up that we're working on. We've identified some pretty significant gaps in the Big River training programs that specific sectors or providers need. And so this list, the first 3 on this list are a response to that, that feedback that folks had, that like, for example, House Bill 2315 in 2021 adds a 3-hour continuing education requirement for traditional health workers and other behavioral health workforces. As we did the Rules Advisory Committee and tried to draft the implementation of that, we heard over and over again from traditional health workers that they needed a training that was free, that was online, and that they could take on demand, in addition to all of the other options that are already available. And so that work is happening right now, that to develop a free 3-hour suicide prevention online training program. Our eye is on equipping traditional health workers, but that will be available widely for others as well. And so we're really excited about that. There's limits, of course, to what an online on-demand class can do. But the accessibility of it in particular was something that we feel really good about, being able to have something that is free and easily accessible widely. Our friends, hello, Rachel Howard, I see you in the room. Our friends at the Oregon Department of Human Services are working with the Oregon Pediatric Society, also hello, Julie, to create a youth save specific module for child welfare. And that is, we're right in the middle of it. That's happening, and we intend to, that's in a category of we're working on it in 2023, and we think we'll land that plane in 2023 as well. Very excited to announce that the OHA will offer training related to suicide prevention considerations for the Latinx community, that contract is now signed with Raíces de Bienestar, and that we think that training, which also will be, we're purchasing seats in it to try to make it widely available, that it will be in English language and available for providers or youth serving adults. We think it'll be available August or September of 2023. And then our contract with Portland State University, hello Karen, also is now signed. And so one of the pieces around we needed to get better in supporting our colleges and universities in their suicide prevention efforts also has had success in 2023. And then in our tier 3, again, these are just some of the 157 initiatives. I wanted to pull some up that we are a hot minute away from publishing a toolkit for schools on best and promising practices for suicide risk assessment, screening, and safety planning, including asking some advice on liability and planning, having it be a part of a multidisciplinary team, that type of thing. This is something that Nathan Shea, hello Nathan, asked for at the Suicide Prevention Conference in Ashland in October. And it was a thing that we had intended to do for a while. And so that got pulled up in the priority list. And we think that we'll have that before the start of next fall school year as well. Oregon Pediatric Society is just now landing, finishing up a Youth Save training for those serving young adults. They had one pilot of that training, and so we think that will be available here shortly as well. Our friends at NARA Northwest, which is a tribal serving organization, got trained in Postvention Connect Postvention Response. And we're working together with Shane Lopez, who's an Alliance member and works for NARA Northwest as well, to map out culturally specific strategies that we can offer specifically through our suicide rapid response after a postvention services after a youth suicide death. And I think it was this week, it might have been last week, what is time? We got a signed contract for a critical incident and stress management training. It's housed at AOCMHP, which is the same organization that Jen and Annette work for. And this contract will have training available to equip folks to kind of walk through some after a critical event. So we're looking at it through the lens of after a suicide, but it also could be applicable for any traumatic or stressful event. And so we're looking to equip systems to kind of have folks that can come in and care after a stressful event as well. I have 2 minutes. So the barriers piece, I didn't even know what to put on there. I wanted to amplify and elevate that funding is a barrier right now that's heavy on my brain, that when we ask ourselves, we've made some progress in youth suicide prevention. We have work to do, and doing that without an extra pot of money is complicated. And so that's the barrier that's heaviest on my mind at this point. That we had hopes to be able to increase capacity with FTE in counties and in tribes around the state. That was our intention for most of that money. And so I will have to lean in and settle in the powerful network that we have already built, and keep asking. There we go. That's what I wanted to tell you about the update of what we're doing in suicide prevention. What questions do folks have?
None of you have questions? Well, while you all are thinking about your questions, because I know that you have them, because this is a very curious group of humans. Phil, thank you. I'll reiterate what I said to Taylor and Megan, that like you putting together that information probably took a lot of time. And just want to say thank you for sharing the information, letting us know what we can continue to do, celebrating the things that we have done, letting us know that we still have work to do. And thank you for all your leadership behind all of this work. Kirk, I see your hand.
Yes, had a question. When is the 2022 data going to be available in Oregon? You know, I think the more, and we all realize this, the more we keep current, you know, the better we can focus on those areas that really most need our focus. When will the 2022 Oregon data be available?
The finalized 2022 data, we wait for the CDC to release, and this in many past years that's happened in around mid-February or early March. This year it was much later, and so it'll be sometime in early 2024 when the 2022 finalized data comes out. We had a debate internally about whether or not to give actual numbers for 2022 preliminary data, specifically because we're naming an increase in the 0 to 17 age category back to 2020 levels. Essentially they said we can't give a number because they're not finalized yet. And so out-of-state deaths almost always change those numbers by 1 or 2. But they're nearly identical to 2020. And so we're trying to be as transparent as possible, but can't give a number because it will change.
Well, and I think, and just to reiterate, Jill's talking about death data for the Oregon Association of Hospital and Health System data, as well as the syndromic surveillance data. We are providing 2022 data already. There is some preliminary death data released by OHA Vital Stats. There are some dashboards. It's not available by broken out by age, but we can provide that. And again, the OHA suicide prevention team is tracking deaths into 2023 on a monthly basis to identify any trends we're seeing and to try to identify that. So they're just wanted to provide the context between the death and hospitalization ED data.
What other questions do folks have? All right, hearing none. That's, again, thank you, Jill, so very much. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to shift our focus away from data, hearing about data, to gathering some data from all of you. So every year, the Oregon Alliance asks all of you, whether you're a member or not, you are here in the room and we want your voice. So please, 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 if you are here, there's going to be a link that Jen is going to provide for us. And please take a few minutes to complete the survey. It is something that's really, really important for us to figure out how we're doing, what we need to continue to do, what we need to pivot and do differently, what we're missing. And if we don't hear from you all, we don't know. So we value your feedback and really need your time in your survey responses. So Jen, is there anything I'm missing?
I would just say around like the data collection and your voice too, what we gathered from last year's survey, one of the pieces was around wanting more time to process information, just having like really packed agendas, and while you all were saying like we love the information, we want more time to like process and have group discussions. So based on that feedback, we really have tried to limit the amount of agenda items that we've had and like lengthen things to be able to allow more time for discussion. So like Gally said, your voice really does matter, and this is a stakeholder and a community member advisory group. Like Annette and I are the staff, but this is really like all run by everybody here. And so without your voice, we need to know, so that way we can know how we can do better and better support you, our communities, and to better advise on what's going on with youth suicide intervention and prevention. So with all of that, here's the link. If somebody wants to click on it to make sure that it works for me, that would be fantastic, because it works for me because I created it. But
if
just
someone can click on it, let me know. So Jill has posed a question. Do we want Oregon Health Authorities voiced in the survey?
Thank you for that. We haven't before. It's usually just been like all members except for staff, like Alliance staff, and not OHA staff.
So basically, if you are staff to the Alliance, if you're an Oregon Health Authority employee, you don't have to complete the survey, but the rest of us, we get to share our opinions. So please take a moment to click on the link and do that. And then when you're done, you get to have a break. And so basically we recognize the survey might take you time. We will be coming back from, well, actually, we're not going to send you on break yet. Everyone's going to complete the survey. We're going to complete the survey as a group, folks. Complete the survey, and then we're going to go on break. Click on your link. Click on your link.
How much time are we filling out the survey for?
We had on the agenda about 10-ish minutes to do it. So about 10-ish minutes.
Jen, can you send the link again?
Yes.
I have a kind of random question, if I may.
Yeah, I might have a random answer.
Well, good. It says city and county do I work in. I'm responsible for like 9 counties, so I'm just kind of curious how you would like me to approach that.
That's a great question.
Are you wondering like for kind of the what county do you work in question?
Yeah, that one number, 2 or 3 or whatever.
I think you could probably, I don't know if this is an accurate representation, but because like your coalition is called the Gorge Wellness Alliance, does like kind of saying the Gorge capture the areas that you cover?
Yeah, my job has expanded to 4 CCOs, so that's why I'm not. Maybe I don't know. I'll put multiple locations. I'm just
yes.
But I'm coming here. Yeah. So how I started is different than how it is now. So
yes. I think just listing whichever ones you want to capture on this is perfect. So however little or many.
Thank you.
Yeah, for folks who have completed the survey or are not going to complete the survey because you're an OHA employee or an Alliance staff member, take a stretch break, bio break, coffee, tea break, walk around the block. Please, let's see your lovely faces at 11:25. And thank you for taking the survey. We really appreciate it. We need to hear from you. Okay, folks, it's 11:24. You're not kind of slowly making your way back towards your monitors and your laptop. Come towards my voice. Come join me. Welcome back. I hope you were able to take a quick stretch break. I grabbed some more coffee. I went outside. It's still drizzling here in Portland, which I really, again, as I said earlier, I still really like. Hope you
As
all.
someone in 2020 who had to evacuate, I love the rain.
Oh, yeah. As we approach wildfire season, well, we are in wildfire season in the world right now, but yes, yeah. Let us all be safe this wildfire season. All right, folks, it looks like most people are back. And it looks like next on our agenda is some amazing examples of what's happening in the implementation of zero suicide in our state. So we have an opportunity to hear from folks around what's happening in our state around implementation of zero suicide. And it sounds like Megan Crane and Laura Sprouse are going to be talking about Marion County's work. And my guess is also we're just getting one presentation today, sorry. There was another individual who could not be here today due to a family emergency. So we're going to hear from Laura and Megan about what's happening in Marion County, and I'm super excited to hear what you all have to say. So it's all yours, Laura and Megan, whoever's starting.
Sure, yeah, I think this is Megan. I think you get some time with me again first. Jen, did you get my presentation?
Yes, did you want to be the one to share your screen? I can't remember. Sorry, I just shared my mouth.
If you're okay sharing it, I think that will
I'll pull it up just a second.
Knowing our strengths and weaknesses, and my strength is, one of my strengths is not technology. So I'm going to do, while Jen's pulling that up, so I'm just going to do a little introduction to zero suicide. I just want to recognize on this call, we have folks that may not have heard of this or may have heard of it in passing and not really sure it is, to you know, an actual national zero suicide faculty member. Gally is lovely to have her join the national team and all the amazing work that they've done. So I'm going to do a little framing, and then, you know, I think it'll be really helpful to hear from Laura what they're up to in Marion County. So we can go to the next slide. So zero suicide. So what is zero suicide? It really is a quality improvement, healthcare focused initiative, which we can think of healthcare in a broad interpretation, and we'll talk more about that throughout the presentation. But it's really about setting an aspirational goal for suicide prevention focused on the premise that one life lost is too many. And this does not mean that suicide deaths will not occur, but it does mean that staff within health systems, who primarily have historically been the ones to be the heroic heroes on the ground doing this work, are not to blame, and that the organization is really supporting them in doing this work and setting up processes, procedures, support for health systems to be able to provide compassionate and meaningful care to patients experiencing suicidality or who may be at risk of suicide. It's about an organization taking a comprehensive approach to suicide safer care in an agency, as opposed to the onus being on those individual healthcare providers. I do want to make a caveat as I move forward in this presentation that some of these slides are from, the National Zero Suicide Institute that frames a lot of this work. But there's a lot of talk in there about using evidence-based practices. And as always, when we're talking about evidence-based and best practices, promising practices in suicide prevention, culturally tailored programming in suicide intervention and postvention is an area that has been sorely lacking in planning and programming for decades, nationally and internationally. So while it's promising to see increases in funding, research, and attention given to this topic at the national level, and as Jill highlighted, work we're trying to do here in Oregon, the lack in appropriate interventions and treatment for individuals from a culturally tailored perspective is an area that really holds zero suicide back from reaching its full aspirational goals. So we're really looking at focusing on error reduction and safety in care settings, which we look at across a lot of health issues, really looking at the entire system in this approach to care. So we can't just be looking at one program, one individual. And also Zero Suicide really emphasizes the importance of the voice of those with lived experience, both those that have lost someone to suicide, those that are experiencing suicidality, survived an approach. And then I think Zero Suicide is beginning to embrace that lived experience voice means more than just those with lived experience around suicide, but those that experience suicide from different cultural perspectives. So the foundational belief is really that suicide deaths are for individuals under the care of health and behavioral health systems are preventable. Again, this is within healthcare systems, and the language of Zero Suicide can be a little challenging, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Another way to really think about it, I've always found this Swiss cheese example really helpful. So if we think about a person experiencing suicidality that comes into one of our health systems, there are a number of things we need to do to make sure that those holes don't align and someone falls through the holes of the Swiss cheese, not to make light of it, but where there can be a serious injury or death. So Zero Suicide is looking at 7 elements that we have to put in place comprehensively across healthcare systems to help a person experiencing suicidality not fall through the holes. Next slide. So I think this cartoon here, a lot of people can relate to, probably in your work outside of Zero Suicide or not. But what I will also say is that Zero Suicide is not a new approach. There is lots of evidence behind Zero Suicide and this comprehensive approach to suicide safer care that is showing a difference in healthcare settings. I'm not going to go into a ton of that, but happy to refer you to the National Zero Suicide website. I'm happy to provide that data beyond this, but I think I just want to say that although some people talk about this still as an innovative approach that doesn't have research behind it, it does have a lot of research behind it that can show meaningful change for staff, staff, organizations, and supporting patients. Next slide. And I think the Zero Suicide language, going back to that, can be polarizing for some folks. It is aspirational. Henry Ford in Michigan was one of the first systems to put this in place. And since it is really around data quality and improvement, the system leadership was thinking about how can we, what number is acceptable? What do we want? What is our goal? And a nurse in the back of the room raised her hand and said, well, isn't it 0? We don't want anyone in our care to be dying by suicide. And I have put some examples up here of where we use that Zero Suicide language in other health-related areas where I don't think that we get the pushback related to this. I think the Zero Suicide language, again, health systems are not getting Zero Suicide certified and putting that logo, putting that certification next to their logo. This is really an internal effort to look at how to provide comprehensive suicide care. But it also is addressing stigma that we have in the general public that comes into administrators and staff that exist within our health systems and within our organizations, right? We need to acknowledge that and think about that. But I put these examples up here to push back a little bit on the language, to say that we talk about achieving zero aspirationally in a lot of other areas, both within healthcare and within industry, that I think we can think about when there is that pushback about zero suicide. I think one thing to think about when we talk about use the language of zero suicide outside of healthcare settings, I think it can create blame and shame for families or loved ones who have lost someone to suicide, or staff within our agencies that we know are survivors of suicide loss. That's not the intention, but the intention is really to be aspirational, and that they're through these proven methods, we can make significant reductions in and providing suicide safer care for patients that we and consumers that we serve. Next slide.
Sorry, hold on. I clicked something and then it took me somewhere else. Let me.
No worries.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so just to frame this back, Jill talked a little bit earlier about the Oregon Suicide Prevention Framework. When we're talking about zero suicide, we are primarily looking at our yellow clinical and community prevention services, as well as our treatment and support services. As we just talked about, we are talking about just stigma and recognizing that the public and who we are as communities are individuals who work within health systems. And so when we think about the stigma and work we have to do there, that is part of this work as well. Next slide. In Oregon, we were fortunate to get a Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration Zero Suicide in Health Systems grant at the state. Clackamas County and NARA Northwest also have this same grant mechanism, and so they're doing that work internally. So it is a little different for us to think about at the state, what are we doing to support zero suicide? Because again, we're not mandating that systems do this, and we are not the health system itself that is doing the zero suicide work, although that's a discussion we can have. But this was really about what are the gaps, or what are the supports we can put in place to support health systems across the state doing this work. And so the grant, SAMHSA has made this grant focused on adults 25 and older, although we really are trying to embrace supporting zero suicide across the lifespan, recognizing there are some limitations about what we can do with grant funding. But we're looking to really assess success and gaps in zero suicide implementation within Oregon health systems, providing consultation, training, and resources. Again, what are some of those things we might be able to create infrastructure and support at the state level for, that for every health system to do on their own would be challenging, and aligning efforts related to suicide prevention, mental health, and behavioral health. Next slide. We're also, per our application to SAMHSA, we are looking at providing some culturally specific suicide prevention intervention needs for some of our populations at risk, again, within thinking about adult populations, because that's what the SAMHSA grant is focused on. So looking at older adults, adults experiencing serious mental illness, which has a broad definition in our application, and then veterans or those that have served in the military. So what are some suicide safer care interventions practices for those populations that we can look to increase support and learn from? Next slide. So some of the work we've done to date is that prior to having our dedicated Zero Suicide grant, we held a Zero Suicide Academy, which is really for teams to come to learn about the Zero Suicide Academy and begin implementation planning and putting that forward. We held a Zero Suicide community practice and provided some funding to systems to move their zero suicide efforts forward. Since receiving the grant, we've held another Zero Suicide Academy. We have a Zero Suicide Booster, which is really for organizations that have attended an academy in the past, recognizing that there are challenges and barriers, that this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. We have staff turnover and changes that are a reality. So the booster is an opportunity for teams to come back together, address some of those challenges and barriers, and come up with a plan to move forward. And then we're finalizing a request for proposal to support zero suicide implementation and suicide safer care for those grant priority populations to healthcare and supporting organizations. So that will be coming out, we hope, by the end of this month. Next slide. So why is the focus on healthcare? And again, this presentation is around zero suicide and healthcare organizations. This is not to say that the onus is on healthcare alone, right? The Zero Suicide Initiative is a initiative focused on healthcare organizations, but we all have work to do in this area. So this is not to pick on healthcare, but this is just to provide some context as to thinking around zero suicide and the focus on healthcare. So we know that there's an opportunity through some of these stats you can see on the slide here to engage with folks that may be at risk of suicide through primary care, through physical health care, as well as through behavioral health. So this is not just a behavioral health focused initiative. We obviously are looking for we're looking at different interventions within behavioral health, but if we can't get people to behavioral health and identify folks, then we're not able to help folks. And we can't solve this issue just by looking at behavioral health anyway. So we really need to look at how are we supporting suicide safer care across the spectrum of healthcare. Next slide. So the Zero Suicide Framework is really couched within these 7 elements. This used to be a straight line framework, and I really like that they put the circle. They changed it to the circle because it really is iterative. Technically, they will kind of start talking about lead, but they all really lead into each other. And again, since this is really about continuous quality improvement, we come to the improve piece, but the improve piece is really embedded within each of the rest of the 6 elements of zero suicide and are necessary to really seeing if what health systems are doing is making an impact. So each of these elements individually support reduction in suicide deaths and behavior. Each, again, our elements have an evidence-based foundation, recognizing that when we say evidence-based, we're not talking about many evidence-based to many communities that are at high risk of suicide or that we need to support. And emerging evidence suggests significant reductions in suicide in healthcare systems that bundle these core components. So again, I think we see a lot of efforts where we're going to train all our staff or we're going to put the screening protocol in place. But what we're seeing is that when you look at this as a comprehensive approach, looking at all of these elements together, that's really where you can see the impact. So LEAD is really about leadership commitment. This is a huge investment, staff time, and it can't be done without, while you want support across levels of staff, you really need leadership commitment to move this forward. Really training, workforce development and training, looking under identify at standardized screening and risk assessment, engagement. So how once an individual is identified at risk of suicide, how are we really supporting them and recognizing the importance of them in this work? Effective evidence-based treatment for suicidality. Follow-up during care transitions, recognizing that our health systems, that individuals transition between levels of care, maybe within the same organization or within our broader community. And really looking at ongoing quality improvement and data collection. Next slide. So I'm not gonna, this may be a little fast, and I just wanna make sure we get to Laura, because that's where I think you're gonna hear, like, what does this really mean on the ground? But just to talk a little bit about each of the 7 elements. So again, within LEAD, looking for that leadership commitment, establishing an implementation team with staff from across different spaces within your system, from leadership to those on the ground, doing the work, to peers, to consumers that have engaged in your system, really thinking about how to draft, how to explain zero suicide to staff, and that continuous improvement, and hearing from staff what their barriers or thoughts or challenges around zero suicide are. And then there's really a foundational organizational self-study, implementation assessment we're going to talk about a little bit that can help set a foundation. Next slide. Zero suicide really does engage lived experience, recognizing, in this photo you see Dorothy and Alice, There are unique perspectives. Dorothy and Alice have their own unique perspectives, but they have some shared lived experience that they can share with each other and that they can really bring into the room. So if we're developing interventions for individuals at risk of suicide, but not including them in the development of those interventions or understanding what their successes and barriers are, then we're not really doing a good job. And again, I think Zero Suicide is beginning to expand this, not just to lived experience with suicide, but thinking about communities that need to be involved in a much broader sense. Next slide. So training is really about ensuring a competent, confidence, and caring workforce, recognizing that we don't train for suicide-specific interventions or treatment modalities, and that staff, if they aren't trained, won't feel confident and supported in being able to do this work. Just like anyone on the street that you potentially were like, can you support someone at suicide, providing support with suicide. So it's really looking at how are we understanding what staff need, how are we providing training to clinical and non-clinical staff at the appropriate level of training needed. So this could look like piloting and evaluating training for staff from different segments. You know, what training is needed for primary care versus social workers, to determine value for staff and gaps, and really thinking about what's necessary. And this isn't just about training around suicide care itself. This is also about training to an organization suicide prevention protocols, screening tools, risk assessment tools, and safety planning. So we can be doing the interventions correctly, but how is the organization set? How are people understanding their roles and responsibilities to the protocols and policies put in place in the organization? Next slide. Identify is really looking at how are we identifying individuals with suicide risk via comprehensive screening and assessment. So again, some tools are listed here. These are not the only tools. I think when we are talking to organizations, really talking about screening and assessment. And again, not just like we have the tool in place, but thinking about how we're actually implementing that tool, how we're working and engaging clients so they actually respond appropriately, or not respond appropriately, but are set up in a way that they feel comfortable answering the question. That if we are going to screen folks, that we actually are following up on that screening. You hear too many stories of people filling out a screening and it not actually being followed up with, which just leaves an individual feeling, oh, I like even identified I was at risk of suicide and no one cares. Next slide. Engaging is really about recognizing the importance that the individual at risk of suicide is in creating a effective suicide care management plan. So in Zero Suicide, they call this a pathway to care. When someone is identified at risk of suicide, how are they being supported? So again, it's not saying, well, here's a blanket safety plan that obviously is going to work for everyone. The individual that maybe is dealing with a physical ailment that you say, oh, well, you know, walk around the block, and that's not feasible. So it really has to be engaging with the patient, hopefully led by the patient, or helping the patient identify what their risk factors and what would help them if they were in a suicidal crisis. And this really includes lethal means counseling as well, which I think has been an area where we have done a lot of work in Oregon, and it has generally been a lot of work is going on, but recognizing the need for that. And really, again, taking not just a risk perspective, but thinking about a strength-based approach as well, which I think through Youth Save and some other programming we've done, we've tried to embrace as well. Next slide. So transition is a big piece. And again, this is within organizations. So when someone is in that pathway to care at risk of suicide and then transitions out of it, it's not like we just say, okay, you're good to go. You don't need any supports. It's really recognizing that warm handoffs are needed, that relationships between organizations are needed. So when we think about a health system, the transition piece is really where it's like it has to be broader than your system. You can't just kind of support patients and then once they're done, be like, okay, you're good to go, right? We need to make sure that we're having relationships between health systems within regions and communities, I don't think I need to tell anyone about this. And we need the supports, which I think we're doing a lot of work around right now. Next slide. I do want to note on the transition step, again, we talk about Zero Suicide as a healthcare focused initiative, but again, this can't happen in a vacuum, right? It can't happen within four walls of a hospital. That's not where an individual lives. That's not how an individual is going to thrive. Oftentimes, again, community groups, coalitions have really connected with the Zero Suicide language and the 7 elements. But there are some, especially the next element we'll talk about, treat, where it's a little more challenging to think about what a role might be for an organization that doesn't have clinicians that can provide suicide-specific care. There has been some work out of Canada to really adapt the Zero Suicide Toolkit for community organizations that maybe are not a formal part of the healthcare sector, but may support individuals as they transition between levels of care on an organization. So I think this is a great toolkit, especially from a community perspective, to really understand what Zero Suicide might look like, or for health systems that are trying to engage their broader community, recognizing, again, this can't be done in a silo of one system. All right, getting close, almost done here. Treat. So treat, again, is around, we have not been really providing suicide specific treatment and interventions. They need to be provided alongside other treatments that may support an individual. Again, I've listed some of the evidence-based treatments, which again, has a limited viewpoint, although many of these treatment modalities are looking into how their programs work for different communities and cultural groups. CAMS actually just came out with something showing that they have been able to use some of their tools for different populations. This also includes brief interventions, collaborative safety planning, caring contact. So again, we can look at really big protocols like DBT and CAMS, which are labor intensive to train folks on, and recognize that there are different levels of treatment. And finally, next slide, improve. So again, all of this has to be within having policies and procedures for continuous quality improvement. If you say you are screening, you define screening, let's just say in organizations like we're universally screening everyone for suicide, can you actually pull that data and show that's happening? If it's not happening, how are you following up with the staff that maybe are there staff that aren't doing that? Can you have conversations with them about what the barriers or challenges are to them not doing that? So we need to be able to show that the changes that a system puts in place are actually showing change and are actually being done. And so this is why improve is technically the 7th element, but it really needs to be embedded from the very beginning. Next slide. So we contract with Portland State University, Karen's on the call, to help with evaluation of Zero Suicide efforts in Oregon. So this is an example of where across 10 health systems, across those 7 elements, where are we kind of seeing where a baseline was, and then where change has been made. This is a little outdated at this point. We have updated data, but I think from a state perspective, again, it helps us say, okay, so where are organizations maybe needing support from a state level? And I think I'm just going to say Galley's Cat, I think, is a great, there's an evidence-based suicide intervention for you right there. Sorry, it was just so cute. So we are tracking this and trying to identify at a state, given our limited resource around this, what can we do to support and where systems may be doing well on their own. We also provide this individually to health systems so that they've found it really helpful to show leadership, to sustain efforts, to show where they're doing well, identify gaps and priorities. Next slide. This is just an example of some of the actual indicators when we're trying to measure what change is happening. We have adapted the Zero Suicide implementation assessment in Oregon to really incorporate the indicators into the assessment. And then we recently just did an update really led by Karen with a lot of consultation by Oregon and National Zero Suicide folks And you'll see on the asterisks, those are things that we added that are really important, that National Zero Suicide says are really important, but how do you measure that? Like, what does it mean to have commitment to zero suicide by leadership? What does it mean to have a just culture and philosophy of care? We say, you know, we put workforce build, and this is really important to this initiative, but what does that mean and how do you actually implement that? Next slide. Again, so this is really just emphasizing that post-pension and employee wellness are really important to the Zero Suicide Initiative. This is something they've talked about more recently at the national level, but again, it has been kind of, how do you measure that? How do you implement that? So that's something we've done some work on in Oregon to try to emphasize, given some of our broader suicide prevention work. Next slide. So if you're interested in getting started with zero suicide, you know, there are a lot of tools on the National Zero Suicide Institute website. I will say that website can be like it has so many amazing resources on it, and it can be a black hole that you could spend like 10 days on. You know, I see one of my jobs here is if you're looking for a specific resource, like, please reach out to me. I won't say that I know everything that's on the Zero Suicide website, but we have consultation with Zero Suicide, with the National Zero Suicide Institute. We have great leadership in this state from health systems that have been recognizing or been implementing zero suicide. I think I know something about zero suicide at this point. So I'm here. This is my job. So please reach out to me. We have that organizational implementation assessment that, again, we're working with Portland State University on, and we, through the grant, can provide support for your organization to do that, to get started. Filling out the organizational assessment with your team is a great way to become familiar with the model, the framework of zero suicide, and understand where your organization is at. And again, looking to, you know, repeat that over time. So those are just some ideas on how to get started. And then the next couple slides are just some resources, both in Oregon. We have, you can go to the next one, the Oregon, we do have an Oregon Zero Suicide Toolkit. It's not meant to replace the National Zero Suicide website, but has success stories and tools and materials that have been developed by Oregon systems implementing zero suicide, and we're doing some updates to that. As a reminder, we have legislation, HB 3090, the rules and statutes related to that in terms of discharge planning when someone presents to the emergency department with a behavioral health crisis, and then some of the national links. So I'll stop there because I want to make sure that we have time for Laura. And I'm not sure if I'll look to Annette or Jen if you want to take questions now, or potentially, you know, let Laura launch into her presentation, and then we can take questions afterwards.
There were 2 questions in the chat, and I think one question might be pretty specific to you, Megan. So I'm gonna pose that one right now, and that, I think, was how many zero suicide committed systems are in the state? Do you happen to know?
I would say we have close to 15 right now. It is a huge initiative. I think with, like, as kind of alluding to John's question above, you know, how does zero suicide address the lack of mental health providers and difficulty finding therapists for those in needs? It is a huge issue, you know, in implementation of zero suicide right now. And I think when we talk about employee wellness and all the efforts that are going in broader behavioral health and mental health workforce right now, it's a huge issue. And I'm sure that others on this call who are working in health systems trying to do this work are trying to address that. So I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture that everything is perfect, but I think if we can support staff in feeling competent to be able to provide the care that they want to provide to people who are at risk of suicide within an organization that is supporting them in getting trained and then following up with them on challenges and barriers, that we can support staff. Hopefully, I think a huge element of zero suicide is having staff that are supported who stay in an organization so that individuals can get that ongoing and supportive care. So, John, I won't pretend to have a perfect answer to that whatsoever, but there's some thoughts. And yeah, we have about 15 systems that are somewhere in zero suicide. I think there are some organizations too that zero suicide feels like a heavy lift, because honestly, it is a big lift, but are tackling different areas of suicide specific care within those 7 elements, and maybe as a launching point or a start to some of their work. And we continue to reach out to different organizations. Again, there's no mandate or requirement around zero suicide. We're just really trying to understand how we can help and support systems who are exploring this or want to commit to doing this work.
Thanks, Megan. All right, Laura, the floor is yours. Can't wait to hear all about it.
Okay, thanks, Callie. Jen, am I able to share my screen?
You let me know if it doesn't work though.
Okay. All right, can everybody see that? It's kind of a purpley color slide.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks again for having me this morning to just share a little bit about our zero suicide progress at Marion County Health and Human Services. I know a lot of you here, but for those of you that I don't know, my name is Laura Sprouse. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Zero Suicide Program Coordinator for Marion County Health and Human Services. I am just a little bit of context as to who I am. I am a suicide loss survivor. And I have a pretty scattered history of work between higher education and youth corrections and wraparound systems of care. But this by far has been my most favorite work I've been able to do, just because of how much hope is there with it. So I want to give you a little bit of history about where we've been with our Zero Suicide initiative. So we were a part of the Academy in 2018. We had a core implementation team that attended there, and later that year convened our multidisciplinary Zero Suicide Champions Committee. That was our really our initial implementation push. And we had really great buy-in and strong support from our executive leadership and those at the kind of county head level. So we began implementing zero suicide in 2019. I have a feeling that our organization is not alone in this, that we lost some momentum due to the pandemic, and we had several of the coordinators who had been coordinating this initiative left, and then a lot of our implementation team left. So the decision was made to create a position specific to implementing zero suicide, because it was, like Megan said, a huge lift. So I am the first person to hold this position. I've had to teach myself how to do my own job. So it's been an adventure. So I've been in this role since January 2021. And I'm really passionate about the Zero Suicide Initiative because it is so innovative and it really can adapt to the changing needs of organizations and the individuals that organizations like ours serve. This is a really wordy slide and I apologize, but I wanted to give you an overview of some things that we've accomplished, and I'm going to call out a couple of these here. We have launched some pretty massive messages of hope and awareness campaigns in great collaboration with the Mid-Valley Suicide Prevention Coalition. The two biggest ones we've done have been It's Okay to Not Be Okay and Life is Better With You Here. We've done pop-ups in the community, and for our employees, we've done coffee sleep campaigns, had signs of hope all over our campuses, etc. We did issue an employee survey to assess attitudes and knowledge of zero suicide, and did that first in 2019 and again in 2021, and it really demonstrated some marked improvements of knowledge and best practice suicide prevention and intervention strategies and skills. We've done wellness activities for employees to really help with that kind of retention and lower the risk of burnout for our staff. One thing that is still in a lot of progress for us is implementing pathways to care through our electronic health record system. Our new EHR just went live in April, and so we're still really learning how to use that on a day-to-day basis. But the hope is by the end of the year that we'll be able to use these mapped out pathways to better support individuals with thoughts of suicide in receiving consistent and timely care, no matter what program of ours that they are enrolled in or where they come into contact with us. I want to highlight a couple other things in particular that I feel like we've done exceptionally well and that I'm just personally really proud of in working towards full implementation of the framework. So I'm going to highlight our staff training policy and matrix, our improvements to our transitions in care, and our postvention plan. So we've had a huge push for staff training, and this aligns with the train and ultimately the engage and treat elements of the framework. The goal has been for all of our staff to be trained in their required trainings by June 30th, 2023, which is right around the corner. Unfortunately, with changing staffing levels and program needs, this has made it a bit difficult to accomplish fully, but we really are making some impressive strides. And I apologize, this document is super small on your screen. I'm happy to send this to Jen so that she can include it as an attachment to the meeting minutes for this. All of our new staff that were hired after, I think it was August 31st of last year, have 1 year from their date of hire to complete their required trainings. So we're still putting some guidelines around how soon we would like staff to be trained. And as you can see from the document there are 3 different groups. The first group is a lot of our administrative, clerical, non-client facing staff. That we still want them to have a basic level of understanding of suicide prevention. So QPR is kind of our gold standard baseline that we use there. Group 2 in the middle is a group of folks who have maybe limited contact with individuals in service or with community partners, but may still need some additional resources. So we do require them to take QPR and usually the online version of CALM, Counseling on Access to Lethal Means. And finally, group 3 is those who have the most direct contact with individuals in service. They're doing our daily clinical work, a lot of our peer support programming, things like that. So we require QPR, CALM, Safe Talk, and Assist or Youth Save. And we've been really fortunate to partner with Insight Agency for Change for Safe Talk, Assist, and CALM. So I'm just very grateful for that partnership. I know that I don't think I've seen Michelle and Charlotte on the call today, so but I just want to give them a shout out. Also, in order to be more trauma informed, we created a training exemption form for staff who have experienced a loss or otherwise feel that they can't complete their trainings within the required time frame. And this form, I really wanted to be very intentional about being confidential for staff, being just a check-in tool that a supervisor uses with them. So they submit that form to their direct supervisor, and we encourage supervisors to review this with their employees at least quarterly, just to assess where folks are at and if there's additional supports that are needed for them. I'm excited that we will be revisiting the workforce survey this fall to reassess our staff knowledge, especially because we've had so much staff turnover, and just see where we are as compared to 2 years ago. I'm also really pleased to say that with the efforts of several internal trainers, as well as I think Nathan Shea is still here. He has helped with some trainings for us. Over 90% of our nearly 500 person workforce has received QPR training in the past 3 years. But we also have trained plenty of folks from our Board of Commissioners office, Public Works, just all over the county. We've gotten a lot of interest in that. The next thing I really wanted to highlight was a transitions of care policy and form that we've created. This really aligns with the identify, treat, and transition elements of the framework. I had an intern from PSU who supported the creation of this document within the past few months. But really, we wanted to look at where we can reduce errors and potential circumstances where someone could fall through the cracks by addressing it with a more formalized method of tracking when our individuals in service are transitioning care. So this form is created so that if a staff member is leaving or they need to, for whatever reason, resign themselves from a particular case, they can note really important safety and clinical information and then provide a warm handoff to a new provider. This has been piloted with our adult outpatient clinic, and the plan is that hopefully by the end of the year, it will be able to roll out across all of our outpatient programs once it's integrated into the new EHR. I would also love to see this used in something like our public health clinic, our WIC program, for any staff turnover that occurs there. So that's been a really awesome tool for our staff to be able to use that is really trying to address some of those gaps that we were seeing with an uptick in suicide attempts and deaths. And again, I'm sorry that this form is so tiny on there. I will again pass that on to Jen. So the final piece that this is probably my biggest, the thing I've worked the hardest on and the thing that I'm most proud of is our postvention protocol. We have had Connect trainers within Marion County since 2019, but we were only able to get in 2 or 3 trainings for staff before the pandemic began. Currently with this protocol, we are only offering Connect postvention as a training to management. I'm kind of exploring how we can roll that out a bit further for all of our staff. And we finally completed our protocol in April, so a couple months ago. Our protocol is split up into 3, technically 4 portions. It addresses the suicide or otherwise untimely death of an employee, an employee's family member, or an individual in service, and addresses those on whether or not they occur on our agency property. And it has some supplemental documents with it. So I just want to give you kind of an overview of what those are. The introductory letter really is meant to serve as a grounding tool for those that are using the process where they can seek support, just a reminder that this may activate difficult feelings for them. We also have a glossary of terms for, there's some buzzwords around postvention and stuff like that may not be familiar to everyone. So wanted to make sure that there was clarity going into the protocol. We have a fatality fact sheet that is used to organize information about the death, which includes family contact information. Does the family consent for different supports to be offered? And then what kind of ongoing supports are needed, both for the family that's affected and, potentially employees or others that are impacted. We have some memorial guidelines for internal memorials with some guidelines for the length of time and a safe and sensitive approach to those within the workplace. Media guidelines and just kind of general, how do we talk about this safely? How do we share about any death with the media if that's needed? How do we communicate that information safely to staff and to individuals in service potentially? And then we have some communication templates. So these are like plug and play templates for supervisors and administrative staff to use to inform staff of death with safe language and with a connection to resources. A big part of postvention, as many of you may know, is the evaluation and the follow-up. And so this really operationalizes a follow-up process to address any systems gaps or individual clinician needs in the event of a individual in service dying. And we did base the format on the document that Megan shared briefly in her part of the presentation, the Manager's Guide to Suicide Postvention in the Workplace from the National Action Alliance. So what's next for us? We've done a lot in the last few years, but there's still a lot more to be done. We hope to build some crisis response flight teams or just responders for internal incidents. There have been multiple incidents and traumas in the past few years. At one point, Marion County was operating 3 different states of emergency at one time. And so it's really highlighted the need for a more trauma-informed and employee-led response. So the hope is that we will eventually have a team that can respond to incidents like suicide attempts, deaths, and community traumas, if needed, to provide some of that psychological first aid and really support resiliency building and recovery. We've been in talks about potentially transitioning those that are on our Zero Suicide Champions team into this role, plus any others who may be interested in supporting their coworkers. So, but that's still to come. Again, we're really working on finalizing and operationalizing the pathways to care in our EHR, so that we can, bridge any gaps in treatment or care, as well as optimize referrals to appropriate care for folks. We also hope to really utilize universal risk screenings across all of our programs. Currently, they're only used in our outpatient care and crisis settings, but the hope is that they'll be consistently used in our substance use treatment and programs like our WIC program, our public health clinic, things like that, where suicide may not be the main concern there, but there could be some opportunity to identify risk. Our incident reporting process, we have some really outdated forms, and our staff need better training, especially because we've had so much turnover. Between March 2022 and March 2023, a quarter of our workforce turned over. So that was pretty challenging. And then we also need a better tracking method to analyze trends and improve our systems. So we have a team in our admin department that are working on how to better utilize that system and just improve the way that we are able to track things. And then finally, creating a sustainable training calendar. We want to be able to keep providing these best practice trainings to staff as we experience turnovers and changes, but we also want to be able to adapt to the needs of our staff and clientele if there are specific things that are coming up that they need training around. So we're also looking to, now that we've moved, we're still in the era of COVID, but we're moving out of it. Looking to bring back some dedicated in-service days for staff to complete some trainings and potentially provide some more specific trainings. So that's all I got. I am more than happy to be a resource for any organization that is wanting to begin Zero Suicide along with Megan. And Gally was a huge resource for me when we were getting started with this. I have to give that shout out as well. So please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to support how I can, and I'll be happy to share all the documents that I shared today with the follow-up.
Laura, I just have to say, I am just so you have done so much work in such a short period of time. And you said you had to start, you had to create basically a job description for yourself. So kudos to you for rocking it. You've done amazing stuff. And I'm just I'm thrilled at what you all are doing. And it's really cool. I have a couple questions for you, and I would just love your thoughts about a couple things. So first of all, I love the training exemption form that you created for staff. I think that's brilliant. And I love, not only does that signal to our staff that we want to support people who may not feel comfortable going through trainings, but we are prepared to talk about it. And then we're giving people an out if they feel like they don't want to participate in training. So that's brilliant. So I love that. And I would love to see that form.
Yeah.
So I hope that you'll share your slide deck.
Yes.
And then the other question I have, or the other actual question I have is, I love the transitions of care document that you have. And it sounds like that's primarily used when staff are departing or transitioning. Have you ever considered using it for other transitions of care when folks are stepping up or down between levels of like going from inpatient to outpatient, or, you know, outpatient to wrap, or to, you know, I mean, have you ever done it at the client level? Have you ever considered doing it at the client level?
We've done it like if an individual requests a transfer between their outpatient providers. But we haven't necessarily done that between, you know, like our crisis services and outpatient. Just because like I said, our EHR is still very much in its infancy. And so making sure that we can operationalize that for our day-to-day billing and documentation first before, you know, implementing something like this. But that is a fantastic idea, and something that I would love to see. We unfortunately don't use the same EHR as our hospital, or the main hospital here in Salem. So, you know, there's some barriers there to how do we share that information, but really hoping to, I would love to see it for transitions in levels of care for sure.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I might pick your brain. That might be something that we pilot at Clackamas County to figure out a way to support safe transitions, and maybe use the model that you all have created in Marion County to kind of piggyback on some of that.
I think schools would be interested in, like, it wouldn't be the same exact form, but that conversation often comes
Happens.
in around school folks too.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe the Alliance, maybe we'll be tapping you all, and then local counties tapping you all too. So
yeah.
Thank you, Laura, for all of that amazing information. What questions or thoughts or comments do people have for Laura?
I also just, I forgot to mention how much of a resource Chris Bifulco has also been to us with our post-pension planning. She's been just phenomenal at answering questions and making sure that we're in alignment with, you know, best practice, even though we kind of adapted the formatting for our own. And it's amazing to the point that it's getting, the word is getting out about our model, and ODHS is actually preparing to model their post-pension policy for internal deaths based on ours. So that's another big pride point for me.
Laura, can you say something about, I mean, it's just such a comprehensive effort. I don't know how they funded your position and who's the leadership. Like you really have to get leadership at the county to say suicide prevention is important. And I think for those of us doing suicide prevention across the state, we'd love to think about how to get the leaders in our counties, in our communities interested in that.
So I'm funded partially through our behavioral health program and partially through our administrative side. When we first began implementing Zero Suicide as an initiative across HHS, we really we had some leadership in place at the time that was advocating for it super strongly. Some of you may know Sydney Nestor. She now works with ODHS. And then our health department administrator at the time had lived experience with suicide loss and felt very, very strongly about implementing Zero Suicide. So at first it really was a public health effort, but then it was recognized that, you know, our public health provider or our public health suicide prevention coordinator couldn't manage all of like the external facing and the internal facing. So that's why this position was really created. And I have to thank Sydney for her advocacy in that for sure. But I would say like the effort and energy has continued with folks who have subsequently stepped into our leadership roles. And I think that that's because we're seeing this work. We're seeing this model be effective in how we treat folks at risk of suicide. and it's not only been effective for treating folks at risk of suicide, but also for supporting our own staff, kind of as Megan mentioned. So I think there's been a lot of, there's been a lot of energy behind it.
Karen, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah. I was interested if you could say a little more about how having this framework has impacted staff. Like, how have your staff reacted to having all this training and planning around policies and procedures?
Yeah. A lot of our staff have expressed that even though they're kind of voluntold to go to trainings, that they're learning really tangible skills that are impacting their daily practice. I remember last year getting a call from someone who had just completed an assist training, and he was in the middle of an intervention with a client via text, and he's asking me, am I saying all the right things? Am I doing the right things? And he was like going literally by the book. Like, if you've been to assist, it's literally a book. So he was literally following the book. And I was just like, this is great to see this actually in play in our practice. We've also heard from folks that like the wellness initiatives that we've done, especially during COVID and when we were still telecommuting, were really helpful at helping people feel connected. And I think just in general, feeling like there's more confidence and competence in how to talk about suicide, because as we know, so many behavioral health professionals do not receive any sort of formal training before they're, released to work with clients. So.
All right, folks. Well, thank you again, Laura. Amazing information. Super proud of the work that's happening in Marion County, and that we have Marion County in the state of Oregon. That's a pretty cool thing. So, and thank you, Megan, for the overview of Zero Suicide. And just a reminder too, Megan is a great resource for Zero Suicide. Laura is we have a lot of great champions here who are doing amazing work. So you have subject matter experts amongst you in this amazing group of women. So Annette, I know you had a few things to briefly share before we close down in about 3 minutes.
Very briefly. I just wanted to share with everyone that one of the ways to be engaged with the Alliance is to say, I think this is really important and it's something we need to work on. And then we can look and see if it's connected to our youth suicide, to our suicide prevention framework. And we've actually recently had Alliance members or people attending our meetings, two different groups have calls to action to the Alliance. And one of them is a call to action from the LGBTQ advisory and the equity advisory group. And it's really asking everybody, especially a call out to allies, to step into interrupting the extremely negative and harmful rhetoric and policies that are impacting LGBTQ youth right now. And, in my own school district, a school board meeting got shut down this week. They had to clear the room because the level of violence in terms of both the rhetoric, and there were community people there specifically to support and give the opposite view. And I think that really made a difference for the youth in this community. And so that's an ask for all of us to do that. And if you want to be part of planning a larger call to action around that and are interested, we are doing an in-person afternoon on Saturday, July 6th. And the registration link is on here. You can also email me if you're interested in being part of that planning afternoon. And then Jonathan, if you don't mind just briefly sharing your call to action.
Real brief, folks. Sorry, I don't want to be hurrying folks, but I just want to be mindful of time.
Absolutely, yeah. And the call to action is primarily around safety this summer, around firearm accessibility to youth in the home. And so if you are interested in learning more about that call to action or would like more information, you can reach out to myself or Jen Fraga. And just a quick shout out to that, just the power of the Alliance and the communities that you all are serving. I felt called to do that call to action a few weeks back, but I didn't have the capacity to do much about it. And so a handful of you rallied, as well as folks that are in this room, and came up with a really fast turnaround plan. So shout out to all of you and thank you. And like I said, if you'd like to learn more, please reach out.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, folks, just a really these are two really important reminders about the power of this group. So if you are struggling with an area and you feel like you need advocacy around it, or you need some brains around it, please bring it to Annette, Jen, myself. And you'll never know that maybe your idea is something that other people are thinking about, and we can get some traction around it. So on that note, folks, it is 12:29. Thank you for spending 3 hours of your Friday morning with us. We had a jam-packed agenda, covered a lot, and I hope that you learned a lot today about what's happening in the state of Oregon, what you all are doing, what your colleagues are doing, and the amazing suicide prevention work that is happening in this state. And if it wasn't for all of you, it would not be happening. So pat yourself on the back. I'm grateful for all of you. For who you are, how you move in the world. And if it wasn't for you, we would not be where we were. So have a wonderful Friday and see you soon. Take good care. Thanks for being here.